The sky over Forward Base Gamma was the color of a fresh bruise, purple and green swirls of Verdant's alien atmosphere. On the ground, the air smelled of ozone, crushed vegetation, and tension. Captain Li Min stood on the reinforced observation platform, his hands resting on the cold railing. Below him, in a series of interconnected trenches and prefabricated bunkers, his battalion moved with quiet purpose. They were not many, a few hundred souls against a planet. A soft chime sounded in his ear implant. "Captain," came the voice of Sergeant Park Ji-hai from her scout position. "They're here. All of them." Lee raised his binoculars. To the east, across the wide-open plain of the Borealis continent, the horizon began to move. It was not a trick of the light. It was a wave. From the tree line and beyond, a gleaming tide of silver and gray advanced. Rank upon rank, row upon row of Vorath soldiers. Their armor was identical, their movements perfectly synchronized. They marched without speaking, the only sound a low, thunderous hum from their powered suits and the rhythmic, ground-shaking stomp of a million boots. It was a display of pure, overwhelming force. It was meant to terrify. "Sound general quarters. Non-essential personnel to the deep shelters," Lee said, his voice calm. He lowered the binoculars. He didn't need them to see the scale of it anymore. The sea of enemy soldiers filled the plain, surrounding the base on three sides, a metal noose slowly tightening. Inside the main command bunker, the air was cool and filtered. Banks of screens showed the advancing legion from every angle. Specialist Kim Tae-suk's fingers flew across his console, pulling up thermal readings and density maps. Estimated count holding steady at 1 million plus. "Captain. Their formation is textbook Vorath Legion Assault Pattern Delta. They're not even trying to be clever," murmured Lieutenant Bay, the tactical officer. "It's just mass. That's all they've ever needed," Lee replied, his eyes scanning the data. He saw the beautiful, horrible simplicity of it. 1,000,000 soldiers acting as one giant fist. No independent thought, just directive and execution. It was a model of efficiency for crushing lesser foes. A new signal flashed, priority almost comically formal. It was a demand for a direct communication channel. General Ktharn himself. Lee gave a small, tight nod. "Put him on the main hollow. Let everyone see." The center of the room shimmered. A life-sized hologram of General Ktharn materialized. He was tall, his chitinous plates a deep, polished crimson, unlike the silver of his troops. For dark eyes stared out from a face that seemed carved from stone. His voice, when it came, was a deep vibrato that made the speakers buzz. "Captain of the human forces. I am General Ktharn, Sword of the Vorath Ascendancy. You see the instrument of my will. 1,000,000 soldiers. The might of a civilization that has conquered 12 star systems. This world, Verdant, is now a protectorate of the Ascendancy. Your presence is a contamination. Order your forces to lay down their arms and surrender this base. You have 1 standard hour to comply. Resistance is annihilation." The image was clear, the message clearer. In the bunker, the silence was heavy. All eyes turned to Captain Lee. Lee stepped forward, into the edge of the hologram's light. He did not look intimidated. He looked interested, as if Ktharn was presenting a complex engineering puzzle, not an ultimatum. He took in the sight of the proud general, the implied power of the legion behind him. He met the 4 dark eyes with his own too. His voice, when he spoke, was flat, calm, and devoid of any fear or bluster. "Perfect." General Ktharn's head tilted slightly, a gesture of confusion. Lee continued, his lips barely moving. "I have 1,000,000 objectives." He made a small cutting gesture with his hand towards Specialist Kim. The hologram of the stunned Vorath general vanished mid-inhale. The connection severed abruptly. The silence in the bunker was now absolute and stunned. Lieutenant Bay was the first to break it. "Sir? 1,000,000 objectives? We have barely 300 combat-effective personnel. Our primary objective is survival. Our secondary is to hold this base." Lee turned from the empty space where the hologram had been and walked back to the main tactical display. The red tide of Vorath icons was still creeping forward. "You're thinking like him, Lieutenant," Lee said, not unkindly. "You're thinking about one big thing. One big enemy. One big objective." He zoomed the display in, not on the front lines, but on the rear of the Vorath formation. On the support columns, the logistical lines, the dense clusters of troops standing in reserve. "He has 1,000,000 soldiers," Lee said, pointing at the sea of red. "That is not a strength. It is a monumental problem. 1,000,000 soldiers need to eat. They need to drink. They need ammunition, fuel, spare parts for those suits. They need orders, they need communication, they need to sleep, they need their waste processed. They are a 1,000,000-point system." He looked around at his team. "A system can be disrupted, not by a bigger hammer, by 1,000,000 small, sharp pins. We don't have 1,000,000 soldiers, but we have 1,000,000 problems we can give him. Our objective isn't to defeat his army. It's to make his army defeat itself." He began tapping commands into the console, pulling up different maps, geological surveys from Dr. Yoon, hydrological charts, atmospheric data. Sergeant Park's team is already out there. Their objective isn't to kill Vorath. It's to tag supply containers with trackers. Specialist Kim, your team's objective is to find a low-level logistical frequency and introduce a 1-hour delay into all routine distribution orders. Just a small error. Engineers, I want the output of the Western Aquifer pump slightly increased. Make the ground near their staging area a little muddier than it should be. The orders were small, peculiar, unrelated to direct combat. Each team, each soldier, gets a local objective. Something small, achievable, and disruptive. You see a wire? Don't cut it. Swap 2 of its connections. You see a parked vehicle? Let the air out of 1 tire, not all 4. You find a field kitchen? Their standard nutrient paste is bland. Dr. Yoon says they hate the taste of a local root called scallow. Find some. Make it a seasoning. A slow understanding began to dawn in the bunker. It was not a strategy of defiance, but of relentless, pervasive annoyance. A death by 1,000 tiny, insignificant cuts. He is waiting for our surrender, or for one glorious, stupid charge into his guns, Lee said, a final glance at the tactical screen. He will wait a long time. We are not going to fight his war. We are going to make him fight 1,000,000 tiny, petty wars he does not understand. Now, everyone, you have your first objective. Find one small thing, and break it in a quiet way. The bunker became a hive of quiet activity. The initial shock of Captain Lee's statement wore off, replaced by a focused energy. His words were not a grand speech, but a new set of instructions. A new way to think. Lieutenant Bay looked at the main screen showing the vast Vorath Legion. 1,000,000 soldiers. It was an ocean. But Lee was telling them not to be a rock against the wave, but to be the sand that gets into every gear of the machine. Specialist Kim, Lee said, forget their military command network. It will be too strong. Look for the civilian contractor channels. The ones used by their food suppliers, their waste management, their uniform laundry services. Kim Tae-suk blinked. Laundry, sir? Every one of those soldiers gets dirty, Lee said. Find the system that tells a cleaning unit which camp sector to service today. Then change the order. Send it to the wrong side of their encampment. It's a small thing, but 1,000 small soldiers in a dirty camp are 1,000 slightly unhappy soldiers. Kim nodded, a slow smile spreading on his face. This was not about cracking codes for a missile strike. This was about being a digital mosquito. He turned to his console, his fingers starting a different kind of hunt. Captain Lee moved to the communication station. He opened a general channel to every soldier in the battalion. His voice was calm and clear in their ear implants. This is Captain Lee. The Vorath General has given us an hour. We will not spend it waiting. New rules are in effect. You are no longer just a rifleman, an engineer, a medic. You are now a problem maker. Your primary goal is to create local, non-lethal effects. Do not engage their soldiers unless absolutely necessary. If you see a chance to slow them down, to confuse them, to waste their time, you take it. You do not need my permission for these small acts. Use your eyes. Use your brain. I trust your judgment. In the trenches, soldiers looked at each other. A rifleman named June looked at the advancing wall of silver. Then he looked down at his position. He saw the loose soil, the small rocks. An idea, small and strange, formed in his mind. Outside the wire, Sergeant Park Ji-hai and her three-person team were flat against the earth. They wore active camouflage suits that mirrored the colors of the grassy plain. They were very close to the eastern edge of the Vorath encampment. They could hear the deep hum of the Legion's generators and the clank of armor. Park watched a line of large, boxy vehicles roll to a stop. Supply haulers. Vorath drones began to unload crates, moving with efficient, mindless speed. See the crates with the blue stripe? Park whispered into her mic. Those are marked for atmospheric processing units. They're air filters. Dr. Yoon said the pollen here clogs fine filters if they aren't cleaned often. Her point man, Choi, watched. We blow them. No, Park said. We help them get lost. She pointed. The drones take the crates to that temporary holding yard. See the supervisor? The one with the yellow armband? He scans them, then points where they go. She observed for 2 more minutes. The supervisor scanned each crate, checked a data pad, and pointed. The drones obeyed. Kim, Park said to her tech specialist. Can you make a copy of that supervisor's scan signal? Just a simple duplicate ping. Easy, Kim's voice came back. It's a basic inventory frequency, not even encrypted. Sending the waveform to your data pad now. Park's small device lit up. She set it to transmit. She looked at Choi. When the next blue stripe crate comes, I will scan it with our fake signal from here. You, from your position, scan it again 2 seconds later. It will register in their system twice. It might make the crate go to the wrong pile. It was a tiny action, insignificant in a camp of 1 million. But they did it. 5 times as the unloading continued. 5 crates of important air filter parts were now potentially misplaced in a vast logistical yard. Back at the base, the engineering team led by Sergeant Park's brother, Min-soo, worked on the aquifer pump. They didn't sabotage it. They adjusted its flow rate, just a 5% increase. The effect would not be a flood. It would be a gradual saturation of the soil in a low-lying area where Vorath troops were massing. By morning, that ground would be softer, muddier. Their heavy infantry would sink in just a little deeper with each step. It would waste energy. A medic, Hannah, reviewed Dr. Yoon's notes on Vorath biology. She learned about their sensitive nasal membranes. A common local spore, harmless to humans, acted like a mild irritant to them, like pepper dust. She and 2 others quietly gathered baskets of the dry, spore-laden fungus from the base's perimeter. They didn't have a plan for it yet, but it was a potential problem now collected. Captain Lee watched the reports come in. Small, green dots on his map showing his team's positions. Small text updates appeared. Tagged 12 supply crates with trackers. Introduced minor lag in their internal transport schedule. Altered soil composition in grid sector 7E. None of these things would stop the Vorath Legion. Not one of them. Lee looked at the countdown clock. The hour given by General Ktharn was almost up. The huge formation had finished its advance. They now stood in perfect ranks 2 kilometers from the base perimeter, a silent, gleaming threat. Lee knew the attack would come soon. A massive, direct assault. That was Ktharn's way. The Vorath general was probably expecting fear, or a desperate surrender signal. He was not expecting that the humans had spent the hour not in prayer or panic, but in becoming gardeners of chaos, planting 100 tiny, invisible seeds of future trouble. The war had not yet begun in Ktharn's mind, but in Lee's the first moves had already been made. They were not moves of force, but of friction. And a machine with 1 million parts, Lee thought, cannot run well if someone has sprinkled sand into every single joint. The hour ended. There was no further message from General Ktharn. There was only action. A deep, resonant horn sounded across the plain, a note that vibrated in the chest. Then the Vorath Legion moved, not in a chaotic rush, but with a terrifying, beautiful precision. The front ranks raised their energy shields, creating a solid wall of shimmering silver light. The ranks behind them lifted their long-barreled pulse rifles. They began to advance. A slow, relentless march. The ground trembled. Inside forward base Gamma, alarms blared. Soldiers took their positions. Captain Lee stood in the command bunker, his face lit by the tactical screen. The red tide was flowing towards the thin green line of his defenses. They are committing to pattern Delta, just as predicted, Lieutenant Bay said, his voice tight. They will hit our strongest point, the northern berm. They will try to break us with one hammer blow. Let them, Lee said quietly. He switched his comms channel. All units stand fast. Remember your training. Fire at will, but conserve ammunition. Your job is not to kill 1,000,000. Your job is to make this one attack as expensive as you can. On the northern berm, Rifleman June felt the fear turn into a cold focus. He peered over the reinforced edge. The wall of silver shields was getting closer, a moving fortress. He could see the glowing slits where the Vorath soldiers looked out. He took a breath, aimed not at the shields, but at the ground just in front of the advancing line and fired. His plasma bolt hit the dirt, kicking up a cloud of dust and smoke. All along the line, other human soldiers did the same. They were not trying to pierce the shields yet. They were trying to obscure the view to create a screen. The Vorath response was immediate and brutal. 1,000 pulse rifles fired as one. Brilliant lances of blue energy tore into the human positions. The air crackled and screamed. A bunker to June's left took a direct hit and exploded in a shower of composite plating and sparks. June ducked down, his ears ringing. This was the reality of Ktharnes Way. Simple, overwhelming force. The human defenses were good, but they were not designed to absorb this much punishment for long. Reports of casualties began to filter into the command bunker. Lee listened, his jaw set. He had known this would happen. This was the price of their plan. Sergeant Park's team is in position behind their eastern flank, Specialist Kim reported. His voice a sharp contrast to the booming outside. Tell her to wait, Lee ordered. The objective is not to relieve pressure. The objective is to observe. I want to know what happens in their rear when the main attack is underway. On the screen, the human green line was bending but not breaking. They were inflicting damage. A Vorath soldier here and there would stumble as a well-aimed shot found a gap in the shield wall. But for every one that fell, 10 more stepped forward. It was a grinding, brutal arithmetic that favored the Vorath immensely. After 30 minutes of relentless assault, the horn sounded again, 2 short blasts. The Vorath advance stopped. The firing slowed. Then the entire formation began to pull back in good order, dragging their wounded with them, leaving their dead on the field. The sudden silence was almost more shocking than the noise. Smoke drifted across the blasted ground. The humans watched, exhausted, as the silver tide receded back to its starting point. Lieutenant Bay let out a shaky breath. We held, but we can't withstand many more like that, Captain. Our power relays on the north berm are at 40%. Ammunition is down by 1/3. Lee nodded. He was looking at a different screen. Sergeant Park. Report. Park's voice came through, hushed but clear. Sir, it was strange. When the attack was at its peak, their rear areas almost shut down. The supply drones stopped moving. The maintenance crews just stood by their vehicles, watching the frontline feed on their screens. It was like the entire back half of the army was holding its breath. They only started moving again when the recall sounded. Lee allowed himself a small, hard smile. Thank you, Sergeant. Pull your team back to Waypoint Echo. Well done. He turned to his officers in the bunker. Do you see? The entire system is built for one thing, the big attack. Everything stops for it. Every mind, every resource is focused on that single hammer blow. It is powerful, but it is also blind. And when the hammer is not swinging, the system is idle. He pointed to the casualty reports. That was costly for us. But we learned. We learned that their million soldiers only do one thing at a time. And while they are doing that one big thing, 1,000,000 small things are left unattended. What do we do now, sir? Lieutenant Bay asked. We repair what we can. We rotate our troops. We let them rest, Lee said. And we continue our work. The small work. Kim, I want you to try a new signal. See if you can access the maintenance schedules for their personal armor systems. Maybe a few hundred of them get a false notification that their suit air filters need a 12-hour cleaning cycle. Just a suggestion. The orders went out. The humans did not celebrate holding the line. They went back to work. Engineers crawled through the damaged bunkers, not just fixing them, but adding small, hidden surprises. Tripwires that released bags of sticky gel, motion sensors that played irritating high-frequency sounds. The Vorath Legion across the field was also doing repairs and rearming. They were efficient. They were preparing for the next big, perfect hammer blow. General Ktharn would be satisfied. He had tested the human wall. He had found it strong, but not strong enough. The next attack would break it. He did not know that the human captain was not focused on the wall. He was focused on the sand. And more sand was being quietly sprinkled into the gears of the great Vorath machine with every passing hour. The War of the Million Objectives had survived its first brutal test. Now it was time to dig in. 2 days passed. The Vorath did not launch another major attack. The silence from the Legion was heavy, a constant pressure. But inside Forward Base Gamma, the work did not stop. It had become a kind of rhythm. Sergeant Park Ji-hai and her team were resting in a shallow cave system, a kilometer behind the Vorath's eastern flank. They had been moving for 48 hours, sleeping in short shifts, always watching. Their camo suits were smeared with local mud and dust. They ate cold rations quietly. Park studied the data on her small pad. The trackers they had placed were still working. She could see the crates of air filter parts. They were not where they were supposed to be. The double scan trick had worked. The crates sat in a remote corner of the supply yard, listed in the system but physically misplaced. We need to do something with them, her point man Choi whispered. They'll find them eventually. Park nodded. She keyed her mic, keeping her voice low. Specialist Kim, this is Raptor Team. Can you access the maintenance schedule for a Vorath atmospheric processor? A specific one in the eastern sector. After a moment, Kim's voice came back. I can see the schedule. They have a cleaning cycle due in 3 days. Why? What if it was due now? Park asked. And what if the system said the parts were already at the location? There was a pause on the other end. You want me to make their computer think the parts are there, and that the work is overdue? That would generate a high-priority task for a maintenance crew. Exactly, Park said. But the parts aren't really there. So the crew shows up, finds nothing, and has to go looking. It wastes their time, creates confusion. A small confusion. It's a good idea, Kim said. She could hear the smile in his voice. Give me 10 minutes. Park looked at her team. We stay here. We watch. About 20 minutes later, they saw movement. A small vehicle, a flatbed with 2 Vorath soldiers in lighter armor, drove towards a large, humming unit at the edge of the camp. It was one of the atmospheric processors, a machine that cleaned the air for the troops. The 2 Vorath got out. One consulted a data pad. He looked annoyed. He pointed to where the parts crates should be. They were not there. The 2 soldiers began talking, their gestures sharp. One got on the comm. They walked around, looking. The maintenance vehicle sat idle. The scheduled cleaning did not happen. Park watched for an hour. The 2 Vorath spent the entire time walking back and forth, making calls, checking other piles. A simple 30-minute job had become a half-day puzzle for 2 soldiers. Finally, another vehicle arrived with the correct parts. The 2 original soldiers looked frustrated and tired. It was a tiny victory. No weapons fired. No one was hurt. But 2 soldiers were taken out of their duty for hours. Their efficiency was reduced. Their mood was poor. Objective achieved, Park whispered into her mic. Back at the human base, other small things were happening. The mud in the low-lying area where the Vorath heavy troops gathered had become a nuisance. It wasn't deep, just ankle-deep muck. But it meant the soldiers had to work harder to walk through it. Their powerful legs grew tired a little faster. Their boots were always dirty. It was a constant, low-level irritation. The hacked logistics network was causing more delays. A delivery of energy cells for the Legion's personal weapons went to the wrong battalion. That battalion had to send a request, wait, then send runners to collect them from another battalion who didn't need them. It was a ripple of minor inconvenience that traveled through the camp. Captain Lee reviewed the reports. They were not reports of battle. They were reports of friction. 2 maintenance soldiers idle for 4 hours due to missing parts. Heavy Infantry Company reports higher fatigue rates from terrain. Internal comms traffic shows 3 separate disputes over misplaced supplies between Vorath mid-level officers. Each item was small, but together, they were like grains of sand in a boot. You could still walk, but it was uncomfortable. And if enough sand got in, you would get a blister. Then a sore. Then you could not walk at all. Lee called Dr. Yoon on the comm. Doctor, the spores you told us about. The ones that irritate their nasal passages. Is there a way to get a large amount of them into the air near their processors? Dr. Yoon's voice was thoughtful. The processors pull in air from a wide area. If you could introduce a concentrated source of spores into the intake zone, the filters would be overwhelmed. The spores would get through. It would not hurt them, but it would be very annoying. Like a constant tickle they cannot scratch. Thank you, Doctor, Lee said. He had an idea. It was another small objective. He needed to find a way to get a bag of spores into the right place. He looked at the main screen. The Vorath Legion was still there. A silent, mighty force. General Ktharn was probably planning his next grand assault. Confident that his numbers would win. Lee was not planning an assault. He was planning to make 1,000,000 soldiers sneeze. He was planning to make their boots muddy, their supplies lost, and their maintenance crews frustrated. He was fighting a war not of bullets, but of bothersome details. And every small, successful action proved his point. 1,000,000 soldiers were not a strength. They were 1,000,000 small problems waiting to happen. He just had to help the problems along. The small victories began to link together, like separate streams finding each other to form a creek. The creek began to carve a new path through the war. It started with Sergeant Park's misplaced air filter parts. Because of the delay, the cleaning of the Eastern Sector atmospheric processor was rushed. The Vorath maintenance crew, behind schedule, did a basic job. They cleared the main filters but did not replace the fine secondary screens. Specialist Kim, monitoring their low-level communications, saw the work order marked as complete. He also saw the next scheduled filter check was now pushed back by a week. He sent a quiet update to Captain Lee. Lee then spoke to the medic, Hannah, who had collected the bags of dry, spore-laden fungus. It's time, Lee told her. We need to get one of those bags very close to the air intake of that specific processor. Can your team do that? Hannah was not a frontline soldier. She was a medic, but she understood the objective. We can try, sir. At night. That same night, Hannah and 2 engineers moved like shadows. They used a small, quiet drone, little more than a fan and a basket. They loaded one of the cloth bags of dry fungus into the drone's basket. They flew it on a slow, careful path from the human lines, far around the edge of the Vorath camp. The night wind was calm. The drone reached the coordinates near the eastern processor. It hovered over the large, grated air intake vent. A small mechanism tipped the basket. The bag fell, landing softly right on the grating. A fine, invisible cloud of tiny spores puffed out and was immediately sucked into the machine. The drone flew away, unseen. The next morning, the change was not immediate. But by midday, the Vorath soldiers in the eastern sector began to sniffle. It was a slight thing at first, a twitch of the nose, then more frequent sniffling. By the afternoon, the sector was filled with the sound of harsh, grating sneezes. The spores, which would have been filtered out by a clean system, were now circulating in the air. The sneeze was a violent, full-body action for a Vorath. It broke their perfect posture. It disrupted their focus. A soldier on guard duty would sneeze and lose sight of his sector for a second. A technician would sneeze and fumble a tool. It was a universal, humiliating distraction. Meanwhile, the other small acts were having their own effects. The persistent mud meant soldiers were spending extra time cleaning their armor and weapons. The constant minor supply delays meant mealtimes were sometimes off, or a squad might have to share power cells. These were not crises. They were irritations. But a million small irritations, spread across a million soldiers, began to create a mood. Specialist Kim, listening to the open Vorith channels, heard the change. The communications were still disciplined, but now there was a new layer of traffic. Short, frustrated exchanges. Where is the nutrient paste for Company 891? The soil here is still unsatisfactory. My squad's mobility is reduced. My unit's nasal membranes are inflamed. Request additional filter checks. The requests piled up. They flooded the lower-level management channels. Mid-level Vorith officers, whose job was to keep things running smoothly, were now swamped with 100 tiny problems. Their system was not built for this. It was built for big, simple tasks. Attack, defend, resupply. It was not built for a plague of petty annoyances. General Ktharn, in his command vehicle at the heart of the camp, received different reports. His senior officers told him of the minor issues, but they framed them as logistical hiccups. The humans are engaging in small-scale nuisance activities, General. They are beneath our concern. The Legion's combat effectiveness remains above 98%. Ktharn believed this. The reports of sneezing and mud were not worthy of his attention. He was focused on the next major offensive. He was studying the scans of the human base, looking for a new point to crush. He saw the small problems as proof of human weakness, not as a strategy. To him, it was the behavior of insects, not warriors. He did not see what Captain Lee saw on his own screen. Lee saw a network of green dots, his people, and a web of tiny, completed objectives. He saw the data from Kim, showing a 15% increase in low-priority Vorith comms traffic. He saw the reports from his scouts about the visible frustration in the enemy camp. The great Vorith machine was still running, but now it was running with a shudder. A sneeze here, a stumble there, a confused pause somewhere else. The machine's perfect, synchronized rhythm was developing a stutter. Lee called a meeting with his key people. Their faces were tired but alert. The cascade is starting, he told them. One small problem makes another problem worse. Their filters are dirty, so their soldiers sneeze. Their soldiers sneeze, so they are less alert. Because they are less alert, they make more small mistakes. Our job now is to gently encourage the cascade. Find the next link in the chain. He looked at Sergeant Park's face on the comm screen. Your team found the first link. The air filters. Good work. Now find another. Look for what happens next. Write part 6, all of them one by one of. The cascade turned into a flood. It was not a flood of water, but of small, buzzing troubles. In the Vorith camp, the mood shifted from disciplined focus to a low, simmering frustration. The sneezing in the eastern sector spread. A clogged filter meant spores got through. Those spores settled on uniforms and equipment. When soldiers from that sector mixed with others, they brought the irritation with them. Soon, entire companies were sniffing and sneezing. This led to the next problem. The Vorith medical orderlies were overwhelmed with minor complaints. Their system was built for battle wounds, not for a planet-wide head cold. They handed out basic antihistamine gels, but the supply began to run low. Requests for more gel flooded the logistics network, which was already struggling with misplaced deliveries. Specialist Kim watched it happen from his console. He saw the medical supply requests spike. He saw the confused responses from central supply. With a few careful keystrokes, he did another small thing. He created a duplicate request. He made it look like a large shipment of antihistamine gel had already been sent to the wrong battalion, the one stationed in the dry western sector where there were no spores. This caused more confusion. Arguments between medical officers and logistics officers crackled over the comms. General Ktharn finally noticed the noise. He summoned his senior staff. Why is there so much chatter about nasal filters and dirt? He demanded, his voice a low rumble of displeasure. Minor environmental adjustments, General, his logistics commander said, standing stiffly. The humans are engaging in petty sabotage. It is beneath our notice. The combat units remain ready. But they are not rested, snapped a subordinate officer from the Eastern Front, his nasal membranes visibly inflamed. My soldiers are distracted. Their efficiency is down. Efficiency is a measurement for machines, Ktharn said, dismissing him with a wave of his hand. We are warriors. A warrior ignores discomfort. The humans hide behind tricks because they cannot face our strength. This proves their weakness. He turned back to the main tactical display. Their tricks have cost us nothing but annoyance. We will answer with undeniable force. We will cut the head from this insect hive. He pointed at the scan of Forward Base Gamma. Their command center is here. Captain Lee is there. We will stop scratching at the edges. We will crush the heart. He ordered his elite reserve, the Crimson Guard, his best soldiers in heavier, more powerful armor, to prepare. Their objective was simple: a single, focused, thunderous strike on the human command bunker. Break through the northern defenses, ignore everything else, and destroy the leadership. Once the head was gone, the body would die. It was a clean, honorable, and direct solution. The Vorath war machine, confused and itchy in its rear areas, now had one clear, big task to focus on. The order brought a sense of relief. The elite soldiers began to assemble. This was something they understood. Captain Lee's scouts saw the movement. The Crimson Guard were hard to miss. They reported the massing of heavy units in a single, concentrated spearhead. Lieutenant Bay looked worried. They've identified our command post, sir. They're coming for a decapitation strike. They'll throw everything at our north wall. We can't stop that much concentrated power. Lee did not look worried. He looked almost satisfied. Good, he said softly. Good, sir. He is finally doing what I hoped he would do, Lee explained. He is simplifying the battle for us. He is taking his most powerful piece and aiming it at one spot. He is turning his million soldiers back into one big soldier with one big objective. Lee leaned forward. And when all his attention, all his elite strength, is focused on one spot, what happens to the rest of his army? Understanding dawned on Bay's face. They are left waiting, ignored, with all their small problems. Exactly, Lee said. The system will be more unbalanced than ever. The elite guard will be focused only on their charge. The rest of the Legion will be on standby, confused, sneezing, and waiting for orders that won't come because all command attention will be on the attack. He stood up. So we give them their objective. We let them hit our command post. He began issuing orders, his voice calm and fast. Kim, I want you to prepare a data package. All the fake comm traffic, false logs, dummy command signals. Make it look like my command center is screaming in panic. Amplify it. Broadcast it. Make it the loudest, most obvious signal for them to follow. He turned to his operations officer. We evacuate the bunker of all essential personnel and equipment. We leave behind the bare shell, the antennas, and the power generators. We rig the generators to overload spectacularly 30 minutes after the guard breaches the perimeter. I want a big, satisfying explosion for them. Finally, he opened the battalion-wide channel. All units, this is Captain Lee. Phase 3 begins now. The enemy is coming for me. Let them come. While they are focused here, your mission is unchanged. Amplify your local objectives. The target is no longer the front line. The target is their entire support system. While their fist is clenched to punch us, cut the straps on their armor. He looked around the bunker, now bustling with people preparing to leave. The great Vorath fist was clenching, ready to smash. And Lee's plan was to let it smash empty air, while a million tiny, unnoticed cuts finally made the arm go numb. The Vorath Crimson Guard came at dawn. They were a wedge of dark red metal amidst the sea of silver, moving with a terrifying, focused speed. They did not march. They charged. Heavy plasma cannons on their shoulders blasted apart the human defensive obstacles. Their advance was a straight, brutal line aimed directly at the command bunker. Inside the bunker, only Captain Lee and Specialist Kim remained, surrounded by empty consoles and blinking lights. On the screens, they watched the guards smash through the outer defenses. The human soldiers there fired and fell back as planned, making the fight look real but never committing to a final stand. "The signal is ready, Captain," Kim said, his hand over a large data switch. "Wait," Lee said, his eyes on the screen. The Crimson Guard were almost to the final barrier. "Let them get closer. Let them be sure." The bunker door shook from a massive impact. Dust rained from the ceiling. Lee nodded. "Now." Kim slammed the switch. A wild, chaotic burst of encrypted data, fake distress calls, and panicked command traffic erupted from the bunker's antennas. To the Vorath listening, it would sound like the heart of the human defense was in its final, desperate moments. The heavy door exploded inward. 3 massive Crimson Guards filled the doorway, their cannons humming. They saw the 2 humans at the consoles. They saw Captain Lee stand up, calmly. For a second, there was silence. Then Lee gave a small, almost polite nod. He and Kim turned and sprinted through a rear hatchway, slamming it shut. The guards fired. The consoles and screens behind them vaporized in a shower of sparks. The lead guard scanned the room. It was empty, a hollow shell. His external speakers boomed with a derisive click. He signaled the all-clear. The objective was achieved. The human command center was destroyed. 30 seconds later, the overloaded power generators beneath the bunker reached their critical point. The ground erupted. A huge pillar of fire and dirt shot into the sky. The Crimson Guard at the perimeter felt the heat. They saw the satisfying, definitive explosion. General Ktharn, watching from his distant command vehicle, saw the blast on his feed. A grim satisfaction settled over him. It was done. The head was cut off. Now, the human body would collapse into chaos. Across the battlefield, in the Vorath main camp, the million soldiers also saw the blast. Many felt a surge of triumph. But that feeling quickly faded, replaced by the old, familiar problems. The sneezing did not stop. The supply officer for Company 734 was still arguing over a missing shipment of energy cells. The mud in Sector 8 was still a problem. And now, with the elite guard committed and the command focused on the victory, no new orders were coming. The vast machine idled, confused and uncomfortable. This was the moment Captain Lee had waited for. His voice, calm and clear, spoke in the ears of every human soldier. "All units execute final protocol. The machine is in neutral. Now we remove the wheels." What followed was not a battle. It was a quiet dismantling. Sergeant Park's team, already deep in the eastern supply yard, placed small, focused charges on the central communication relay tower. It fell with a groan, severing the main camp's connection to General Ktharn and the Crimson Guard. Specialist Kim, from a hidden mobile unit, unleashed his final data package. It was a virus designed not to destroy, but to contradict. It sent 1,000 different, confusing stand-down orders to different Vorath battalions. It told one group to advance, another to retreat, a third to hold position. The already fractured low-level command structure broke completely. All across the huge camp, human teams emerged from hiding. They did not fire at soldiers. They fired at things. They shot the tires of supply trucks. They used focused EMP pulses on generator hubs. They cut fuel lines. They opened valves on water tankers. They released containers of the itchy spores into the ventilation systems of the larger troop carriers. The Vorath soldiers, trained for direct combat, did not know how to respond. Some officers tried to rally their men, but found their comms dead or filled with nonsense orders. Some squads moved to help, only to be told by another officer to stay put. The perfect synchronization was gone. The Legion became a crowd of 1,000,000 individuals, each unsure, each irritated, each struggling with a dozen small, sudden problems. General Ktharna's satisfaction turned to horror as his own feeds went dark, then lit up with a hurricane of frantic, confused reports from a camp descending into silent turmoil. He tried to rally his Crimson Guard, to turn them to face this new, diffuse threat, but they were now isolated, cut off, staring at a smoldering crater. Lee walked openly across the field, a small squad with him towards the Vorath lines. They carried white flags and loudspeakers. They walked past the idle, confused Vorith soldiers, who watched them pass, too bewildered to act. Lee found General Ktharn standing outside his command vehicle, surrounded by his stunned elite guard. The general's 4 eyes were wide with a fury that was rapidly freezing into disbelief. Lee stopped a respectful distance away. He spoke, his voice carrying in the sudden quiet. "General, your soldiers may lay down their arms. We will provide medical aid for the respiratory irritation and clean water. The fight is over." Ktharn took a step forward, his body trembling. You have no honor. You fight like vermin. You did not face my strength. You had 1,000,000 soldiers, General, Lee said, his voice still calm. But they only had one objective. Obey you. He gestured back to the vast, stumbling camp. My people had 1,000,000 objectives. And the one that mattered was to make your single point of failure. He tapped his own temple. Irrelevant. Your army was a powerful engine. We just unscrewed every small bolt, one at a time, until it fell apart. Lee looked past the furious general to the rows of Vorith soldiers. They were not fighting. They were just standing there, tired, sneezing, and lost. A system that cannot handle a little mud, a missing crate, or a sneeze, Lee said, was never as strong as it looked. He turned and nodded to his medics, who began moving forward with water and basic aid, starting the true work of peace.